Hey, what's up guys? This is 3D Bonfire back with another amazing tutorial, and this time I want to share this beautiful fungi infection technique with you. So we will use Cinema 4D. In addition, we use Nexus from Insydium just to create a recursive particle simulation here, which will totally eat away your precious 3D object. I'm sorry, but this will be like a really destructive workflow for your 3D objects. So before you apply the fungi to it, just be sure to save it, alright, because this will totally destroy it. Here I have some cool looks for you, so I like the blue one, but I especially like this one with the orange tint, which has more of a less glossy finish to it. So this is my favorite, but maybe you like the green one or you want to go for a purple, a red one, whatever. So this is also such a big fun to apply different shaders to it, because oh man, I have to say it always looks awesome. And we will also talk about the materials and the light setup, of course. I'm a little bit sorry that I didn't render this one out with Redshift. I just forgot to render it overnight, and I'm sorry for that. But if you want to see a Redshift version of this one, then you can definitely check out my Instagram account MarkusGonzo3D in the next days to see this one rendered in full quality in something like this one or the orange one. But also here you can see that the technique is quite powerful, and as I said, save your 3D object before you destroy it, because this is one hell of a destructive workflow. Okay, so once your object is infected, it will never be the same again. And here is another angle on it, so you can see that this one will just totally eat away your object, and this fungi is just powerful and super destructive. And as always, just be sure to check out my Patreon 3D Bonfire. This is the place where you find more of the good stuff. So I have a lot of posts here, like over 600 posts, a lot of cool exclusive tutorials, a lot of discount codes for my Gumroad, and it's just an awesome place to learn. So if you want to have more of the good stuff, yeah, check out 3D Bonfire on Patreon. If you don't want to subscribe to my Patreon, it would be amazing if you subscribe at least to my YouTube channel. Okay, I put a lot of work into these tutorials, so if you support me there, that would be just amazing. And ring the bell, leave a comment, and just do the good stuff here. Okay, so your support will be very precious for me. This is me on Instagram, MarkusGonzo3D, and if you want to buy some products of mine, this is my Gumroad MarkusGonzo. Alright, and one thing I definitely have to mention, that this technique, I learned it from Mike Batchelor in this video. Alright, so when you scrub through the timeline around here, then you can see that he is teaching this technique, but I just applied this technique a little bit further, put one or two more questions into the mix, and put it into a complete finished artwork. Alright, so definitely credits to Mike Batchelor and Insydium here. Okay, but now let's fire up the tutorial. You can see when I scrub through my timeline here, then the fungi is taking over, and this particle system here will be infected inside of this field, and a recursive particle simulation will be triggered. Recursive means, and I hope that I explained this right, that once this is triggered, the creation of new particles will get stuck in a loop of creation and creation and creation. So it will be triggered again and again and again, basically up until infinity. Okay, so these tendrils, they would grow forever if I wouldn't use the clever question and answer system of the nxQuestion to stop it at a certain point. Okay, but other than that, this one will just grow forever, take over your whole Cinema 4D world before it will grow over in the real world and will just take over the whole planet or something like that. Okay, so this is some really powerful stuff, but thanks to nxQuestion, you can pause the growth at a certain point. Alright, bad jokes aside, I think we should start to build this one. And at first I just wanted to go with you through my setting here, but I think to better learn it for you, it will be even better to just start from scratch, right? So therefore I will just go over to a new scene, kill the default sphere, and we will just start from scratch now. Alright, I have to admit I'm a little bit nervous because there are just some things that you can mess up along this setup, but let me try my best here. Okay, so I just go to particles, and let's put an XP emitter into our scene. First we need something like a little cube, like a little box of particles that we can infect. Therefore I would say we don't want to emit from a rectangle but from a box, and this box could be something like a little long box here. Put this one to 400, maybe 150 and 150, or even 100 could be enough in the height. Now when I press play, you can see particles are just shooting out. This is not what we want. We want to emit them as one shot. And we don't need any speed here because we just want to have them in position. But we don't want to have them randomly distributed like this, but we want to have them in a regular grid like this. And when I go back to 0 and you can't see these particles, then it's a good idea to switch from simulate legacy to simulate. And there you can see this is our grid of particles. This is nice. I love it. But I just think the spacing is a little bit too dense for the start. So let's just put this one to 200. So now we have way less particles. But to start with, it's okay to start with a low resolution. Now I think it is slowly time to go into the magic part. So let's go to xParticles Nexus and let's put an nxQuestion into our scene. So we want to ask these particles some questions, but first I can see that I forgot something because I want to start with black particles. So let's turn them on pitch black like this, and we want to use this in our questions and action system. So we want to ask our first question, so just click on question, and the question that we want to ask is if the particle is inside of a field. So then of course we need a field. So let's go to field and let's work with a spherical field. Let's make this one smaller. So I think something like 50 is big enough. And let's maybe just start here outside of the box, somewhere around there, for example. And we could also keyframe this one. So let's create some keyframes. Let's go over to maybe frame 150. Let's move this one over to the endpoint. Let's do it like this. Now this field is moving over and we don't want to ease this one in and out. So basically you can right click on Z animation, show F curve. Let's move this one over here. Let's press H to see the curves. Let's select all of them, put this one to linear. All right, this is good. And now you can see we have some linear movement of the field along our particles. This is good. We want to use this one to infect our particles with the deadly fungi. Okay, so I know this is hard, but we have to do it. Okay, so let's go back into the questions. And Mike Batchelor from Insydium asked another question, which I didn't fully understand, to be honest, but can also do it. So let's add another question. So we can add this one as an AND question. So if this question and this question is positive, then give me an action. So for example, we could ask the particles for its neighbor particles and ask how many particles are around our selection, and then we can set a certain distance and a value of particles and ask if more or less particles are inside of the selection and then trigger the action. But in my case, I honestly don't really need this one. It's a nice AND question to be even more precise with your questioning here, but I think I really don't need them. So you can also just check this one to a red tick box. Okay, so this one is not really necessary in my case, probably. And now it is time to trigger an action. All right, so if this question is positive, so if the particles are inside of this field, and if you want to, you can also ask for the neighbor particles, but I don't want to do that, then turn the black particles to white. All right, and just be sure that this one is really on white. You can see here I messed this one up, so just be sure this one is 0 and 100. So these particles now will be set to a color of white. Let's just see if this one will happen, and there you go. Okay, so we will use this one to trigger a spawning system. Therefore we can add another question again, and I think this one can be out of this hierarchy. So you can start here and you can just ask if the color of our particles is white. And what does white stand for? White actually stands for a brightness value of 1. So just set the vector to brightness and the value of 1. This is how you ask for a white color here, okay? And we don't want to ask for something that is greater than 1 because white is actually equal to 1. So therefore it's better to ask for greater and equal. So if the color of the particle is white, now we want to trigger a spawning action. Therefore let's trigger an action and let's set this one to spawn. Now what do you need? Of course you need a spawn emitter. So let's add an emitter here to our scene. This one will be the spawn emitter. So let's better call it spawn emitter just to not get confused. And let's just see what will happen now. Obviously you spawn particles here, but man, what is this? This looks like horrible. Okay, this is not what you want. You want to be a little bit more precise here with your spawning particles. Therefore, just go to your spawn emitter here. And let's just see. So we don't want to inherit something from the parent system, and we don't want to give them any speed. Maybe we want to give them a radius of 1.5. Okay, so this is up to your decision, and we will probably change this one later. We can set up the distance in which the particle will be spawned. So probably when you set this one to 20, then you can see that the particles are placed all over the place here, around 20 from its original particle. If you set this one to 200, then they will be placed everywhere. So I don't think you want to do something like this. So most probably you want to stay very close to your original particle where it is spawned from. So now you can see they are pretty close to the original particle. Okay, really close. All right, you have to zoom in quite a bit to see these particles. But other than that, there's nothing special happening here. Okay, and now I have to be a little bit clever about my next steps here. I don't want to mess this one up. So a couple more ingredients are necessary here. I think first we could start with a turbulence. All right, you always need a turbulence. Okay, so why don't we do it now? Put a turbulence into the scene. But when you put a turbulence here, then you can see that we also put a turbulence on the particles which should be static here. Okay, so this is not a good idea, but we can restrict the turbulence with some clever mapping here. And once again, I have to thank Mike Batchelor from Insydium for teaching me this. You can map this one to the color brightness of your particles. And basically, when you set it up like this, then this means that your black particles will get no turbulence. And this is exactly what we need here. Okay, so this is already good. Now you can see that the other particles are getting the turbulence, and this is something that I like, but I don't like the noise type of this turbulence. So I like to have this one at curl and reduce the strength quite dramatically. We also don't want to let the noise change over time. So let's get rid of the frequency, and we could also make the noise just a little bit bigger to get a more fitting pattern for our simulation here. Okay, now you get something like this, and I think this is a pretty good start. I just want to reduce the scale to 100. Let me double check it. So this could be interesting, but what we also need is a NX push effect. So we want to push these particles away from each other depending on their radius. And if you want to see the radius of these particles, you could go to the display and set this one to circle filled, for example. And now you will see the real radius of these particles. For example, when I would go now to my nxQuestion and set the radius to 10, then you can see that these particles are quite huge. Okay, so this is not exactly what we want. Maybe we want to have them at 3. Let's just see this one. Okay, that could be better. So maybe for now, let's keep this one at 3. And now it is time to put the NX push into our mix. So let's just go to X particles. Let's go over to Nexus and put the NX push into the scene. And we want to see just what will happen now. All right, now these particles will be pushed away from each other, and almost we got the effect that we would like to have here, right? So now these ones, they will be pushed apart, but overall it seems to be way too violent, to be honest. And I don't want to set this one to an absolute value. I want to set this one to the particle distance and maybe a strength of 70. Let's just see this once again. All right, and oh man, this is beautiful. Okay, so we are pretty close to the result that we like to have here, but I think that we can just maybe tweak it a little bit. So let's go into the nxQuestion. Let's go there, and I just want to see how this would change when we decrease the radius of our particles to 2. All right, now the system will get more condensed here. It will not be like crazy inflated. I just want to show you once again, when you set this one to 10, then they will be pushed all over the place and it will get pretty low resolution and kind of ugly. So let's keep this one at maybe 1.5, and we could also try to spawn 2 particles with each iteration here. So let's see this once again. Now we get more particles. You get basically more resolution for your tendrils. So when I put this one back to 1 and let me simulate this once again, then I mean, this is also okay for the meshing, but I feel just a bit more safe when I will increase this one maybe to 3, for example. All right, we get these beautiful tendrils, but for now I want to keep this one at 2, for example, to just not make the system too heavy to start with. All right, let me see this once again. It looks pretty amazing. I like it. I like it. I really like it. but I just want to make it a bit more interesting. So for example, we could just go to your spawning emitter and maybe we want to just map a parameter, map a gradient along this system. So let's switch this one to gradient parameter. Let's turn this one around, something like this, and let's say maybe to the age or to the distance traveled. Let's just see. So when the particles traveled more than 30 centimeters, it will be totally blue. Let's just see how this one will look. This is more for the visualization in the viewport, and I'm pretty sure that you can also use this color information somehow in the meshing later, but for now I need to figure out how to do this one. I'm pretty sure there's a way to also use this color in your material later, but I'm sorry, right now I don't know it and I have to research this one. This is definitely on my list to check out how to do that, to create even more awesome shaders. But for now, this is just to visualize it so you can see after a certain distance that they traveled, this one will change the color, and this is just looking beautiful. But maybe for now, I just want to get rid of the white and only see the blue one, because I want to show you something. So right now, the system is going on forever. These white particles, they just go on and on. They are once triggered and it just don't stop to continue to grow here. All right, so we definitely want to at some point kill the system and let's say, hey, don't grow further, don't grow until infinity. So this is some problem we want to solve, and we maybe also want to slow these particles down over time. So after a certain parameter, after a certain distance, this one will just come to a rest. Okay, so let's just do this one, and therefore of course we want to ask some more questions. So let's see how to do this one. And now I really have to remember how to do it. So I think the first question that we can ask here is just ask a new question. We don't want to have this one in a row here. We can just start new here. And we want to ask if the particle traveled a certain distance. So let's just go to if the particle traveled something maybe within a distance of 50 and 100, then trigger a certain action. And therefore we want to trigger this action where we want to set the speed of these particles, for example, to 0 with a damping into the 0 state of maybe 30. And yes, we need to set the value to 0. So now these particles that are created here slowly will come to a rest after a certain distance traveled. Okay, so this is the first part, to slow down these particles that are spawned from the white particle. But now we also want to stop the overall system from growing, because these white particles will continue to spawn new particles, and if I wouldn't reach the end of my timeline, this will just grow forever. Okay, so at a certain point I just want to kill these white particles. And how can we do that? I think again, of course, with a question here. All right, and therefore let's add a new question, and we are just safe to start in a new line here, and we want to ask once again for the color of this particle. We once again want to ask if the brightness is 1. So basically that means if the particle is white. So let's just repeat this process. We set the brightness of this one to 1 and say greater and equal 1, which means is it white or is it even brighter than white? Okay, this is the question here. And we want to ask in these white particles if they traveled a certain distance. So for example, you can say if they are white and if they traveled a certain distance. So if the particle traveled a certain distance, for example, more than 25 centimeters, then trigger an action. And in that case, we want to trigger an action and set the color of these white particles to black, which means this one will just end the process of creating white particles, which will continue the emission of particles. So now you can see at a certain point, these white particles, they just become white and they don't emit more of the blue particles. And also the blue particles from the spawning system come slowly to a halt with the set speed, where we come to a 0 movement with a damping value of 30. So you can see they still move, but they slowly come down, and this just feels natural and beautiful. And overall, I would say this is mostly everything about this particle system. Now you could, of course, change the settings here. For example, you could emit more particles in this particle system here to trigger the spawning system from. You could also think about changing the hierarchy of these elements, because this will definitely change the calculation and how the system will turn out. So for example, let's just test it and let's see what happens when we set the question before the push and the turbulence. I'm just curious here, and I just want to see if this one will change it. And I think that definitely this will change it, all right? So, but just be sure that the hierarchy is kind of important. Maybe for now you could also change the parameters here for this system. So let's go into it and let's change the spacing to 150. Now these ones will be more densely packed together. And again, this one will change the outcome of your system. So now there will be even more spawning particles. This one will be denser and maybe it looks more complex and more beautiful, but this is something that you have to decide, okay? So play with the settings. Alright, and I would say this is everything for the basic setup here on YouTube. Just be sure that on my Patreon I will go into making a beautiful part, the meshing part, the lighting part, just to get some really nice results like this one. Man, I just have to say it once again, I love the orange shader here. It's definitely my favorite. Maybe you can also tell me in the comment which material you prefer for this simulation. But other than that, I think that you have all the basics now here on YouTube. And if you want to get more of the good stuff and want to finish this project together with me, just be sure my Patreon will be there for you. But other than that, I hope you learned something useful for your toolkit. Have an awesome day, be powerful, be prolific. See you next time. Bye everyone.